This little guy is the pearlfish, a type of marine fish with a very, very cool life cycle. So as larvae, they start out as planktonic, just free swimming in the water column, but as they get older, they move indoors. Those indoors being inside some marine invertebrates. Largely, they're found in different types of bivalves, including clams, oysters, and scallops, but they can also be found in a number of other marine invertebrates, such as starfish. But since they are mainly found in bivalves that make pearls, that is where they get their name, the pearlfish. Now, most of the time, this relationship is either mutualistic, where both the invertebrate and the pearlfish benefit from the pearlfish living inside the invertebrate. However, it can also be commensal, where only the pearlfish benefits and the invertebrate is left rather unharmed. It doesn't benefit, but is also not harmed either. It's just kind of hanging out. However, they can also be found in sea cucumbers, and for whatever reason, these guys have just decided, fuck you specifically for the sea cucumbers, and instead of being mutualistic or commensal, they are instead parasitic, and instead of just hanging out, they will eat the sea cucumbers' internal organs, including their gonads, or reproductive organs, because they just really decided, fuck sea cucumbers. Now, there is this common misconception floating around the internet that another reason that they get the name pearlfish is because they quite commonly get pearlized or turned into pearl, and this is a very common image that is cited in those cases. However, this image specifically is not actually of a pearlfish that has been turned into an actual pearl. As far as I can find, that this is an actual natural pearl that just so happens to very much look like a fish, specifically a pearlfish. However, multiple sources that I could find have stated that this, under analysis, was confirmed to not actually contain a pearlfish or any sort of fish for that matter. It is in fact a 100% natural pearl that just happened to form into a shape that very, very much resembles a fish. So this one, in this specific instance, is just a regular pearl and not, in fact, a pearlized pearlfish. However, I have also seen this one floating around the internet, and as far as I can tell, this one is legit. If you look right up there, let's zoom in a bit, this does in fact look to be a pearlfish that got encased in the mother of pearl in this type of shellfish. It does very much look to be legit, and there may actually be an actual pearlfish encased in here. However, this is the only example that I could find that does seem to be legit, so this may or may not be the only actual instance of this happening, so it is not, like many people on the internet say, the reason for the name, because it is not nearly common enough for that to happen. This does appear to be a coincidence, and the name does come from a fact that they live within pearl-producing organisms, and not that they commonly get turned into pearls themselves, as many sources on the internet like to state. Regardless, pearlfish still are a very, very cool organism with a very interesting life cycle. Let's talk about shark osmoregulation, because they do it differently. But first, kind of regular osmoregulation. The ocean is very salty, and you are considerably less salty than the ocean. Living things are usually less salty than the ocean, because too much salt, and that is not a good thing. However, the ocean really wants your water. Since you are less salty than the ocean wants to take the water from your body. And if you have gills, like a fish where gas exchange happens, it's quite easy for the ocean to steal your water. Water wants to go down the concentration gradient of high water within the organism to lower water within the ocean, which sounds weird that there's less water in the ocean, but that's a little bit how it works, or at least would work if there was no mechanisms to kind of prevent that. If left to its own devices, the ocean would drink any living organism dry, because it would take all of the water. So living organisms have developed ways for it to not do that. Now, sharks have a very interesting way of doing that. They have in their blood and body a very, very high concentration of urea, which is the stuff in urine. By maintaining a very high concentration of urea in their blood, they are what is called isoosmotic. That means they have the same approximate concentration of salts in their blood as the seawater outside does. Since there's the same concentration on either side of the barrier being skin, then the water just kind of stays. It doesn't all rush out into the ocean because it wants to be at a lower concentration, it just kind of hangs out in balance. Now, other fish do other ways of osmoregulation. It's mainly just sharks that osmoregulate due to this very high urea concentration. Now, this does have some interesting side effects occasionally. This is a Greenland shark, and Greenland sharks are commonly eaten in a lot of northern countries. However, due to the high levels of urea in the Greenland shark specifically, breaking down into ammonia, if not properly processed, the meat of the Greenland shark is quite toxic to eat. You have to process it fully and properly before you eat it, or else the urea breaking down into ammonia can cause a whole lot of health issues. Not good. Now, the bull shark, a specific species of shark that was so hard to say, it took me like 4 tries, it is what is called euryhaline, so it can live in both salt and fresh water, and it has to osmoregulate a little bit differently than everything else. In saltwater, they osmoregulate the same as every other species of shark with very high levels of urea, but if they move into freshwater, suddenly they are in a much less salty environment, and all the water is trying to enter the shark tissues because it wants to go to the lower salt concentration caused by the excess urea. Now, the shark really does not want that because too much water will cause its cells to explode, and we do not want our cells to explode, so they have to get rid of all of that excess urea very, very fast in very high levels, so they produce a lot of very dilute urine. Producing high levels of very dilute urine works to both flush the excess urea out of their cells and tissues, as well as flush the excess water that has gone into the system, because again, too much water, cells explode. So eventually it will get rid of all of that excess urea and all of that excess water and will be better adapted to the freshwater environment. And when it goes back into the saltwater, it will do the opposite, produce a lot of urea to keep in store in its blood and tissues. So sharks are very good at osmoregulation and do it in a very, very interesting way. This is Lake Nicaragua. It is the largest lake in Central America and is found in the country of, you guessed it, Nicaragua. This is a bull shark, and bull sharks are sometimes found in Lake Nicaragua. Yep, bull shark can be found in lakes, which is not a place that you would ever want to see sharks. Now, bull sharks are a type of fish that are classified as euryhaline, which means they can survive in a wide range of kind of salt concentrations, from pretty very salty, whoa, that's not English, from pretty salty to barely salty, and even in some cases, freshwater lakes and rivers. Rivers too. Fun fact, bull sharks have been seen a solid distance up the Mississippi River in the United States, which again, not a place where you would expect to see a shark. Now, originally the Lake Nicaragua sharks were thought to be their own species endemic to the lake, only found there, not found anywhere else, but it has been found that these are actually just regular old bull sharks that have made their way to the lake. And can leave. Some Lake Nicaragua sharks that have been captured and had trackers put on them were later tracked all the way out to the open ocean, which means that there is a way for them to leave the lake. Now, it was previously thought, that they were endemic, that these sharks just happened to be put there somehow, maybe through a storm, maybe through a new, now closed up river, and they were just kind of stuck there, and they were their own population. However, those trackers placed on those few sharks showed them just fucking off right out of that lake. And it was later observed that they actually will swim upstream a couple of tributary rivers to the lake and kind of jump it like salmon do when salmon spawn. Specifically, they've been observed to do this in the San Juan River, which connects the Lake Nicaragua to the Caribbean Sea, where it just kind of shoots these sharks out into the ocean. And then, presumably, when they feel like it, they'll just do the opposite, go down the river, back into the lake, into this freshwater habitat, where they don't really have anything to compete with other than the other bull sharks in there. So it's a pretty sweet deal for those sharks, and a pretty unsettling experience and knowledge if you are not expecting a shark to be found in a freshwater lake. The black ghost knife fish is a pretty popular aquarium fish that is natively found in a bunch of areas of South America, including through Venezuela all the way down to Paraguay. The name, the black ghost knife fish, comes from both the shape, where it looks vaguely like a blade, and a belief of some of the native groups in the areas that it's found that the ghosts of departed people can just relive in this fish, hence the ghost. It is very weakly electric in the same sense of an electric eel, however, mainly it is used to find and locate prey instead of cause any actual harm, and it's pretty harmless overall. There is not enough electricity produced by this fish's electrical organs to actually do any damage to humans. It's also one of the very few fish that is actually capable of swimming backwards instead of just forwards. Stream Heinz Hall, all proceeds go to Palestine. This weird-looking fish is the barreleye, and yes, it is a real fish. It can be found pretty widely in most tropical or temperate areas of the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. It's a relatively deep-sea fish, so it tends to spend most of its time between 400 to 2,500 meters below the surface. They are a relatively small fish, mostly averaging between 6 inches to around a foot, usually right in the middle of their around 8 or so inches. Now on to the most obvious weird thing about this is its head. It is almost entirely transparent, and the eyes are deep set inside what is basically a glob of transparent soft tissue. Now, most of the time, the eyes are pointing directly upward, so instead of looking forwards like most things do, it basically just looks up. That is in order to be able to see prey above it easier, because it's a lot easier to see a silhouette of something swimming above you when there's light to contrast than it is looking directly at it where there's not really any light to contrast. Now, it was thought for a while that the eyeballs only pointed up, but it has since been discovered that they can rotate them forwards to be able to see forwards, which is useful to see where you're going, even in the deep sea where you don't really need to because there's not much stuff to run into. But most of the time it is pointing up in order to see the prey better. Now, there are actually multiple hypotheses as to what function that this transparent dome serves, including but not limited to acting as a lens in order to help better move light into the eyeball. It also may serve to protect the eyeballs from the nematocysts or stinging cells of certain jellyfish or siphonophores, because it has been observed that the barreleye will steal prey from jellyfish or siphonophores that are wrapped up in the tentacles or stinging cells or what have you. So this fish sometimes steals prey from those, and it does not want to be stung by the stinging cells, especially in the eyeballs. In addition to having that weird head, some species, but not all, are also weakly bioluminescent, which means they have light-producing organs on them produced by symbiotic bioluminescent bacteria. Not a whole lot is known about barreleye reproduction. It's hypothesized that they are spawners, so basically they just release the gametes out into the water and let the water do the fertilization for it, but it is noted that the larvae of the fish likely are less deep water than the adults. They usually spend most of their time in the shallow water, and then when they mature to adults, they descend lower. So this is a very, very strange looking fish with a bunch of very neat adaptations. Let's talk about a cool little fish that I very much like, the remora. Here's Emily. Emily says hi. So this is the remora. They're well known for attaching themselves onto other organisms or also inanimate objects such as boats. Now, unlike other things that attach themselves onto organisms, these guys aren't parasites in the same way that things like leeches are. These guys almost always have a mutualistic relationship with the host organism. Unless, of course, the host is a boat, in which case the remora isn't really getting any benefit other than a free ride and some protection. Now, they do this by attaching with that sucker on the top of their head. And interestingly, the sucker is actually a dorsal fin. You know how most fish have like a fin that goes up and has a distinctive, like usually triangular-ish shape? That is the fin that has been adapted into a sucker. It's no longer a fin. It doesn't have any function like most regular fins have. It has its own entirely new function to attach itself to the host. The membrane of the fin sucker is flexible and can be used to increase or decrease attachment to the host. By kind of sliding backwards along the host, it increases the suction that allows it to stick, and then when the remora wants to unstick, it just kind of slides forward a little bit and detaches itself to go on its own merry way. Now, they will attach themselves to many organisms, but largely things like sharks. However, they have been observed attaching to other things, including boats and just divers, like people. Now, this is largely a mutualistic relationship because the remora benefits by having added protection that comes with hanging out with a shark, as well as it saves energy by not having to swim as much and just letting the shark basically swim for it. It also gets food from the host, mostly from the host feces. Yeah, that's largely what it eats. And then the host also benefits because the remoras do occasionally remove other actual parasites, so things that aren't mutualistic, they're parasitic. So the remora will eat parasites that have also attached themselves to the host, and in doing so are sapping the host energy without giving any benefits back, unlike the remora, which do have benefit. Also, the host just gets a little buddy to hang out with. They are a decently common fish. They're found in quite a few places, largely warmer oceans, like more tropical and subtropical, and occasionally temperate, but they don't really go there themselves. They usually only venture up into colder waters if the host that they are on goes into the colder waters themselves. The remoras won't actually go there on their own, but sometimes if their host takes a trip up there, they will tag along. Now, there are quite a few different species of remoras. Some are species specific, where they will only attach onto things like manatees or sharks or whales. That species will only attach to another specific species. Some are less picky and will attach to basically anything they can find. And one last interesting fact, apparently remoras and dolphins aren't good buddies. The remora acts more as a parasite because apparently dolphins don't benefit from remoras at all, which is interesting. And also there's been cases of remoras attaching actually just irritating the skin of the dolphin, which I just found weird. Let's talk about lionfish. So I have mixed feelings about lionfish. On the one hand, I love them like so much. They're up there with some of my favorite fish. They look so cool, but they are incredibly invasive in many areas, and they are causing a lot of problems. So lionfish are native to the Indian and Indo-Pacific Oceans around places like Japan, Indonesia, and Australia, and that's all fine and dandy. That's where they're supposed to be. The ecosystem has evolved with them, so they're not causing any problems there. However, they have been introduced to places where they're not supposed to be, largely the Caribbean and Florida, where they are causing so many problems because they should not be there. They're also apparently getting introduced to the Mediterranean as well, which is again bad. We don't want that. So in their normal range, they tend to be found around reefs and shallow, more coastal areas where they tend to be on their own. They're pretty aggressive anyways. They don't like other fish and they don't like each other. So much so that they tend to be cannibalistic occasionally. But again, natively, where they're supposed to be, that's not really a problem because all of the other wildlife and everything has evolved alongside them and can deal with them. However, in places where they're not supposed to be, like the Caribbean, the other fish don't really know how to deal with them. And so they don't avoid them as they should, and so that causes problems because these very aggressive fish, aggressive to even divers, will just attack other fish, which is not good. So these very aggressive and voracious fish will eat pretty much anything they can kill, and they also have very toxic spines on them, so they really don't have any predators in these areas where they're invasive to. Again, in areas where they're supposed to be, they have natural predators that have evolved to be able to eat them, but in Florida and the Caribbean, they do not. Things don't really know how to get around these spikes, so they don't really try. Now, there have been cases of people trying to, like marine professionals, trying to train local sharks in how to eat them. Some cases it has been going well because sharks aren't as affected by the venom as other things. They just don't really know how to get at it around the spikes. And there's also professional divers where their whole job is to go and spearfish these invasive lionfish, and then they either feed them to the sharks and stuff, or since they are also edible, they sell or even just give them away to local fish markets because you can eat them. They're not the most amazing thing, but they're very common and very cheap. So while I really, really do like lionfish, I like them in their native areas, and unfortunately they are heavily decreasing Caribbean and Florida and Mediterranean biodiversity, which is a massive problem because we need biodiversity to have a healthy ecosystem. So, as with most invasive species, the easiest and most effective way to get rid of them and help the environment is, unfortunately, trying to eradicate them from areas that they are not supposed to be in. The Lancetfish is another very cool ocean fish. It's largely an ambush predator, so it just kind of sits and waits in the water column, and then when it sees something it wants to eat, it will shoot out and go grab it with its big, scary teeth. It will eat pretty much anything that it can get into its mouth, including fish, crustaceans, and other lancet fish. They are pretty cannibalistic. Now, while not exactly a deep sea fish per se, because it can be found at many depths, it does extend from between 100 meters to 2,000 meters below the surface, so it can be a deep sea fish, just not exclusively. It's also not the deepest sea fish, if you know what I mean. They can also grow to be very, very large, around 2 meters or around 6 or so feet, which is a big fish. Not a ton is known about the reproduction because it hasn't really been observed, but the samples collected show that they are simultaneous hermaphrodites, which means they have both male and female sexual organs, and they can produce gametes from both sexual organs. It is hypothesized that they are planktonic spawners, where instead of actually doing the reproduction, they just release the gametes into the water and let the water do the work for them, which does make sense as to the fact that they are cannibals and will eat each other. They are often caught in nets as bycatch, such as during tuna fishing. Sometimes these guys get caught in that, and they are edible. It just isn't very good. You can eat these, it's just not the best, but they are edible. But yeah, another fascinating and weird looking fish.